Sometimes life breaks you so completely that the only ones who understand are those just as broken. Wade Larkin knew that feeling the day he stood at a livestock auction and saw 3 horses nobody wanted, headed straight for slaughter. He was a single dad with an empty bank account and a failing ranch. The horses were old, scarred, and scared. Most people would have walked away. But Wade saw something in their eyes that reminded him of his own reflection. So he bought all 3 for almost nothing. His neighbors thought he'd lost his mind. Why would a man with nothing take on 3 ruined animals? But Wade had a plan that would surprise everyone. What happened next changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ranch looked worse in daylight than it did in memory. Wade Larkin had returned to his late father's property 6 months ago, with nothing but 2 duffel bags, a truck with a failing transmission, and the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones when everything you've built collapses at once. The house needed paint. The barn needed more than paint. It needed mercy. Fences sagged like old men too tired to stand straight. The fields his father had once kept pristine now grew wild with thistle and scrub grass. Every morning, Wade woke to the sound of wind whistling through gaps in the window frames, a lonesome sound that matched the emptiness he felt. He was 48 years old, and his life had become a list of things that used to be. Used to be married to Diane, his high school sweetheart. 20 years together before it fell apart in a series of arguments that started about money and ended about everything else. The divorce papers had been signed 4 months ago. She kept the house in town. He got weekends with the kids and a debt load that made his stomach turn. Used to own Larkin Auto Repair on 5th Street, a small shop he'd run for 15 years. Good, honest work. But when the new franchise garage opened up on the highway with their computerized diagnostics and their financing plans, his customers drifted away. He'd held on as long as he could, but eventually the bank made the decision for him. Used to have a plan. Used to know who he was. Now he was back in the place he'd spent his whole adult life trying to leave. His father, Raymond Larkin, had died 3 years ago. Heart attack while mending fence on a Tuesday afternoon. Wade had come back for the funeral, spent 2 uncomfortable days fielding questions from people who remembered him as a boy, then returned to his life in town. The ranch sat empty until Wade had nowhere else to go. Raymond Larkin had been a hard man, not cruel, but stern in that way men of his generation often were. He'd raised Wade alone after Wade's mother passed when Wade was 7. Taught him to work with his hands, to fix what was broken, to stand on his own. But they'd never been close. Not really. When Wade left at 18 to learn a trade in town, instead of staying to work the ranch, his father had simply nodded and said, "Do what you need to do." They'd spoken maybe once a month after that. Polite conversations about weather and work, never about the things that mattered. Now Wade lived surrounded by his father's things. The worn leather work gloves hanging on a nail by the barn door. The coffee mug with the faded ranch logo. The old rotary phone on the kitchen wall that still worked. It felt like living in someone else's life, or maybe like being haunted by the life he was supposed to have lived. His children visited every other weekend. Corey was 14, all angles and anger, the kind of teenage fury that looks for targets. He blamed Wade for the divorce, for the move, for the instability. He spent his visits on his phone, earbuds in, a wall of silence between them. Presley was 11, still young enough to try. She asked questions about the ranch, explored the barn, picked wildflowers from the overgrown garden. But even her optimism was wearing thin. Wade could see it in the way she watched him sometimes, like she was trying to figure out if he was going to be okay. He didn't have an answer for her. Most days Wade worked odd jobs, fixed fences for Vernon Hutchins, the neighboring rancher. Did some welding work for folks in town, cleaned gutters, changed oil, whatever people needed. The money barely covered feed for the 2 aging cows he'd kept, and the propane for heat. Evenings, he sat on the porch and watched the sun go down over land that used to mean something. Vernon stopped by once a week or so, usually with some excuse about borrowing a tool or checking the property line. Vernon was 62, weathered as old leather, and about as talkative as a fence post. But he had kind eyes, and Wade suspected the visits were more about making sure Wade was still vertical than anything else. "Place could use some work," Vernon had said last week, surveying the sagging barn roof. "Could use a lot of things," Wade had replied. Vernon had nodded, spit tobacco juice into the dirt, and said nothing else. That was their friendship. Comfortable silence, and the occasional observation. The only other person Wade saw regularly was Birdie Callahan, who owned the Crossroads Diner in Timber Ridge. Birdie was 55, sharp as a tack, and made the best coffee in 3 counties. She had a way of knowing everyone's business without being nosy about it, and she treated Wade with the kind of gentle firmness that made him feel like a person instead of a problem. "You eating enough?" she'd ask when he came in for his coffee. "Enough," he'd say. "That's not an answer, Wade Larkin." Then she'd slide a plate of biscuits and gravy across the counter, wouldn't let him pay, and change the subject before he could argue. Timber Ridge was the kind of town where everybody knew your story before you could tell it. Population barely 2,000. Main Street had a hardware store, a post office, 2 churches, a bank, the diner, and a feed store. The nearest Walmart was 40 minutes away. People made their livings from ranching, farming, or driving to the bigger towns for work. It was a community held together by necessity and history, the kind of place where your troubles were private but never secret. Wade knew people talked about him. The Larkin boy who left came back broken, living in his dead father's house like a ghost. He didn't blame them. He'd think the same thing. At night, lying in his father's old bed, Wade stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine what came next. But the future looked as empty as the fields outside. No plan, no purpose, just the slow drift of days that all felt the same. He'd started noticing the auction flyers around town about a month ago. Livestock auctions happened quarterly at the county fairgrounds. Farmers selling cattle, horses, equipment. Wade had gone to a few as a kid with his father. He remembered the smell of animals and hay, the rhythmic call of the auctioneer, his father's careful assessment of each lot. On a Tuesday morning in late October, with nothing else to do and nowhere else to be, Wade drove his rattling truck to the fairgrounds. He told himself he was looking for cheap equipment, maybe a better toolbox or some fencing supplies. But when he walked into that auction ring and saw what was waiting there, everything changed. The fairground smelled like diesel fuel and nervous animals. Wade arrived early, paid his $2 entry fee, and wandered through the pens where livestock waited for their turn in the ring. Cattle lowed in their enclosures, a few sheep huddled together. Someone's old tractor sat on a trailer, rust showing through faded green paint. The auction barn itself was a cavernous metal building with bleacher seating arranged in a semicircle around a dirt ring. Maybe 50 people scattered across the benches. Serious ranchers in clean Carhartt jackets, dealers with clipboards and calculated expressions, a few curious folks like Wade, just passing time. Wade found a seat near the back and watched the first few lots go through. A pair of young steers, a pallet of used hand tools, 3 rolls of barbed wire. The auctioneer's voice rolled through the building in that peculiar rhythm that made numbers sound like music. He recognized a few faces. Vernon sat down front, bidding on a used post-hole digger. 2 rows over, Harlan Frost leaned against the railing, arms crossed, watching everything with the expression of a man counting money in his head. Wade knew Frost by reputation. Mid-50s, owned a large livestock operation east of town. He dealt primarily in cattle, but ran a side business, buying horses cheap and selling them to slaughter facilities across the state line. Legal, profitable, and cold as January wind. Frost had the kind of success that came from never letting sentiment interfere with business. The morning wore on. Wade started thinking about leaving when the auctioneer announced the next lot. "All right, folks, we got 3 horses here, selling as a group, not individually. Bay gelding, approximately 22 years old. Grey mare, 16. Chestnut mare, 8 years. These are what we call economy horses, going to the kill pen if they don't find a home today. We'll start the bidding at $1,200 for all 3. The horses entered the ring through a side gate. Wade sat forward. The bay gelding moved with a pronounced limp, favoring his right front leg. His coat was dull, ribs showing through, and his eyes had that tired look Wade had seen in old men who'd worked too hard for too long. The auctioneer had called him 22, which was ancient for a working horse. The grey mare was smaller, her coat mottled with old scars. Some looked like they'd come from barbed wire, but others, thin, parallel lines across her shoulders and flanks, told a different story. Someone had used a whip on her, and used it often. She flinched at every sound, ears flat against her skull. The chestnut mare was the youngest, but looked the wildest. Her eyes showed too much white. She danced and pulled against the lead rope, head high, nostrils flared. Something about her suggested fire that hadn't quite been extinguished, just beaten down into fear. 1,200. Do I hear 1,200? The auctioneer scanned the crowd. Nobody moved. These are sound animals, folks. Little work. They'll be just fine. 1,000? Do I hear 1,000? Silence. Wade felt something tighten in his chest. He'd worked with horses as a kid. His father had kept 3 on the ranch, used them for checking fence lines in rough country where trucks couldn't go. Wade remembered the patience required, the trust you had to build. He remembered his father's hands, gentle on a nervous colt, voice low and steady. $800 for all 3. That's less than $300 per horse, folks. These animals deserve better than the slaughter truck. The auctioneer was trying. Wade would give him that. But everyone in the room understood the economics. These weren't show horses or breeding stock. They were liabilities. Old, damaged, scared. The cost of feed and care would exceed any value they could provide. Harlan Frost shifted against the railing, clearly waiting for the price to drop further. $600. Anybody? 600 and they're yours. Going once. Wade looked at the 3 horses standing in the dirt ring under the harsh overhead lights. The bay's head hung low. The grey trembled. The chestnut pulled against her rope, trying to escape to somewhere that didn't exist. He saw himself in them, broken down, scarred, running from things that couldn't be outrun. His father's voice came to him across the years. "Son, sometimes the things nobody else wants are the things that need us most." Wade had $23 in his wallet. His truck payment was overdue. He had maybe 6 months of savings left if he was careful. This was the definition of a bad decision. $500, final call. These horses are going to Frost livestock for processing if nobody... Wade's hand went up. The auctioneer stopped mid-sentence. "We have 500 from the gentleman in the back. 500 going once, going twice. Any other bidders?" The room stayed quiet. A few people turned to look at Wade. Vernon's eyebrows went up. Harlan Frost's expression darkened. "Sold for $500 to bidder number 47. Sir, see the clerk to settle up." Wade stood on shaking legs. What had he just done? $500 he didn't have for 3 horses he couldn't afford to feed. No plan. No facilities ready. Just an impulse that felt like drowning and salvation at the same time. He made his way down to the clerk's table, pulled out his debit card, and prayed the transaction would go through. It did. Barely. "You'll need to arrange transport," the clerk said, handing him a receipt. "Or we can hold them here until end of day if you need to bring a trailer." "I'll bring a trailer," Wade said, though he had no idea where he'd get one. Outside, Vernon caught up with him in the parking lot. "That was interesting," Vernon said. "That was stupid," Wade replied. "Maybe." Vernon studied him. "You got a trailer?" "No." "Feed set up?" "No." "Any idea what you're doing?" "Not even a little bit." Vernon nodded slowly. "I'll bring my trailer over around noon. Help you get them settled." "Vernon, I can't ask you to—" "You didn't ask. I offered. Sometimes a man needs help, even when he's too proud to say so." Vernon headed toward his truck, then turned back. "Those horses are lucky you're foolish enough to care." Wade stood in the cold October wind, holding a receipt for 3 broken horses, and wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life or the first right decision in months. Inside the auction barn, Harlan Frost watched through the window, making a mental note. The Larkin property bordered his eastern pasture. He'd been waiting for Wade to fail, to sell cheap. This horse situation might speed things along. Wade drove home slowly, already calculating what needed to be done before the horses arrived. Clean the stalls, check the water troughs, find feed, figure out how to explain this to his kids, to Diane, to anyone who asked. The faded auction flyer lay on his passenger seat. He'd saved it without knowing why. Now it felt like a marker, the moment everything shifted. He didn't know it yet, but 3 unwanted horses were about to save his life. Vernon arrived at noon with his horse trailer, a 2-horse straight load that had seen better decades. They drove back to the fairgrounds in silence, the kind of quiet between men who understood that some decisions didn't need explaining. The 3 horses waited in a holding pen, separated from the other livestock. Up close, they looked even worse than Wade remembered. The bay gelding stood with his weight shifted off his bad leg. The grey mare pressed herself against the far corner of the pen, as far from humans as she could get. The chestnut mare paced, agitated, and watchful. "Going to be a trick getting them loaded," Vernon observed. It took 40 minutes. The bay gelding, whom Wade started calling Gunner in his head, went in first with minimal fuss. He was too tired to fight. The grey mare, Ash, took patience and soft words. She finally followed a bucket of grain up the ramp, trembling the entire time. The chestnut mare, Ember, was a different story. She reared when Wade approached with the lead rope, kicked at the trailer door. It took both men, careful patience, and a few near misses before they finally got her loaded. Wade's hand caught on the trailer latch during one of her panic moments, tearing a gash across his palm. "You sure about this?" Vernon asked as Wade wrapped his hand in an old shop rag. "No," Wade said. "But it's done now." The drive back to the ranch was careful and slow. Every bump in the road made the trailer sway. Wade could hear Ember kicking inside, fighting confinement even in motion. When they arrived, Wade's heart sank. He'd spent the morning cleaning out 3 stalls in the barn, But looking at them now with Vernon's practical eye, he saw how inadequate everything was. The stall doors hung crooked, the water troughs were cracked, the hay he'd managed to buy was old and dusty. "It'll do for now," Vernon said, reading Wade's expression. "Horses don't need perfect. They need consistent." Unloading took another 30 minutes. Gunnar limped down the ramp and into his stall without protest. Ash followed nervously, flinching at shadows. Ember exploded out of the trailer the moment the door opened, nearly knocking Wade over before Vernon guided her into the furthest stall. When the barn finally quieted, Wade stood in the center aisle and looked at what he'd done. 3 horses he didn't know how to heal, in a barn falling apart, with money he didn't have. "You need anything, you call," Vernon said, climbing into his truck. "And Wade, don't try to do this alone." That evening, Wade sat at his father's old desk with a yellow legal pad and his laptop. The internet connection was slow, but he started researching horse rehabilitation, nutrition for senior horses, trauma recovery in rescue animals. He read until his eyes burned, taking notes in his father's careful handwriting style, without realizing he was doing it. Around 10, his phone rang. Diane. "The kids are coming this weekend," she said without preamble. "Corey's teacher called today. He got in a fight at school." Wade's stomach dropped. "Is he okay?" "Suspended for 3 days. I thought maybe spending the weekend with you might help. But now I hear you've bought horses." "Wade, what are you thinking? You can barely afford to feed yourself." "It's complicated. It's irresponsible. The kids need stability, not their father having a midlife crisis with livestock." Wade wanted to argue, but she wasn't entirely wrong. "I'll talk to Corey. We'll figure it out." "Will we? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're falling apart." After she hung up, Wade sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. Then he walked out to the barn. The horses had settled somewhat. Gunnar dozed in his stall. Ash stood rigid, watching Wade with fearful eyes. Ember paced, still agitated. Wade pulled up an overturned bucket and sat in the aisle between the stalls. He didn't try to approach them, just sat there in the dim light, listening to them breathe. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said quietly. "But I guess we're all figuring things out together." None of the horses responded, but Ash's ears flicked forward slightly. Listening. Saturday morning, Corey and Presley arrived with their weekend bags. Corey emerged from Diane's car with his hood up and his face closed off. Presley bounded out, immediately asking about the horses. "Can I see them? Are they friendly? What are their names?" Wade led her to the barn. Corey followed at a distance, trying to look uninterested. Presley gasped when she saw them. "They're beautiful." "They're a mess," Corey muttered. "They've had a hard time," Wade said, "but they're getting better." He explained where each horse had come from, what he knew about their histories. Presley listened with wide eyes. Corey leaned against the barn wall, arms crossed, but Wade noticed he was listening too. "Why'd you buy them?" Corey asked finally. "You don't have money for horses." It was a fair question. Wade chose his words carefully. "Sometimes you see something that needs help, and you can't just walk away, even if it doesn't make sense." "That's stupid," Corey said. "You can't save everything." "No, but maybe you can save something." The tension between them was thick enough to cut. Presley tried to bridge it by asking if she could feed the horses. Wade showed her how to measure grain, how to approach slowly so as not to startle them. Gunnar took the grain bucket from Presley's hands gently. She squealed with delight. Even Ash allowed her to set the bucket inside the stall, though the mare wouldn't come near while people were watching. Ember wanted nothing to do with any of them. That afternoon, Corey and Wade got into it. The argument started over chores, escalated to the divorce, and ended with Corey shouting that Wade had given up on everything, including them. "You quit on Mom. You quit on your business. Now you're throwing money at horses like that fixes anything. You don't fix things, Dad. You just leave." The words hit like a fist. Corey stormed off to his room. Wade stood in the kitchen, hands shaking. Presley appeared beside him, slipping her small hand into his. "He doesn't mean it." "Yeah, he does. And maybe he's right." That night, after the kids were asleep, Wade found himself back in the barn. He sat on his bucket again, this time with an apple from the kitchen. He cut it into pieces with his pocket knife. "Hey, Gunner," he said softly. The old bay lifted his head. Wade held out a piece of apple on his flat palm, the way his father had taught him 30 years ago. Gunner considered for a long moment. Then slowly, carefully, he stretched his neck forward and took the apple. His lips were soft against Wade's palm. It was the smallest thing. But sitting there in the quiet barn, with an old, broken horse trusting him enough to take food from his hand, Wade felt something he hadn't felt in months. Purpose. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm Wade hadn't known he needed. Wake before dawn, feed the horses, muck stalls, check water, work whatever odd jobs he could find, come home, repeat. The routine was exhausting and somehow steadying at the same time. Gunner improved first. With regular feed and a supplement Vernon recommended for joint health, the old bay's limp became less pronounced. He started greeting Wade at the stall door each morning, nickering softly. His ribs didn't show quite so much. The tired look in his eyes began to lift. Ash was slower to trust. She tolerated grooming now, standing rigid while Wade worked a soft brush over her scarred coat. She didn't lean into it the way Gunner did, but she stopped flinching. Progress measured in millimeters. Ember remained a puzzle, wrapped in fear and fire. Some days she seemed calmer, almost curious. Other days she'd explode at nothing, a barn cat, a shadow, the wind. Wade learned to read her moods, to give her space when she needed it. On a cold Tuesday morning, Ember spooked at a tarp that had blown loose. Wade moved to grab it before it scared her further, but she wheeled suddenly. His hand caught on the fence rail, a rusty nail head tearing through his palm in nearly the same spot he'd injured it loading her into the trailer. He stood there watching blood drip onto the ground, feeling the throb of pain, and for a moment, the frustration overwhelmed him. Why was he doing this? What was the point of bleeding for animals that didn't want his help? He wrapped his hand in his shirt and finished the morning chores one-handed. Then he went inside, cleaned and bandaged the wound properly, and stood in his father's kitchen, feeling utterly lost. The house was quiet in that heavy way that made you notice your own breathing. Wade found himself wandering toward the barn, not to work, but just to move. He needed something to do with his hands, some task to occupy his mind. In the back corner, behind old tack and forgotten tools, he found a box he'd never noticed before. Inside were photographs, loose and faded. His father as a young man. His mother, smiling in a way Wade barely remembered. And then one that stopped him cold. A boy, maybe 7 years old, standing next to a tall man. Between them, a bay horse with kind eyes. The boy was Wade, the man was his father, and the horse was Dusty, the first horse Wade had ever known. He'd forgotten about Dusty, or maybe he'd put the memory away because it hurt too much after Dusty died, and everything that came after. But looking at the photograph now, Wade remembered his father's patient instruction. How to approach, how to read a horse's body language, how to earn trust instead of demanding it. "Takes time, son," his father had said, when young Wade got frustrated that Dusty wouldn't come to him right away. "Horse is like a person. Got to prove yourself worthy of their trust. Can't rush it. Wade sat on the barn floor, holding that photograph, and understood something he'd missed before. His father hadn't just been teaching him about horses. He'd been teaching him about patience, about showing up, about the quiet persistence required to heal broken things. The barn door creaked. Wade looked up to see Vernon standing there, backlit by afternoon sun. Saw your truck. Figured I'd check in. Vernon's eyes went to Wade's bandaged hand. What happened? Ember. Fence. My own stupid fault. Vernon nodded and sat down on a hay bale. Horsework is dangerous when you're distracted. What's got you rattled? Wade wasn't sure how to answer. Everything? Nothing? The way his whole life felt like a mistake he couldn't undo? People in town are talking, he said finally, saying I've lost my mind. Diane called yesterday, said I'm setting a bad example for the kids. Maybe she's right. Maybe, Vernon agreed. Or maybe you're doing something that matters and folks just don't understand it yet. What if I can't do this? What if I'm just making things worse? Vernon was quiet for a long moment. My wife died 4 years ago. Cancer. Quick and mean. After she was gone, I spent about a year wondering why I was still here. Couldn't see the point. Couldn't feel much of anything except empty. Wade had known Vernon was a widower but had never heard the story. Had a young nephew, Iraq veteran. Kid came back so broken I barely recognized him. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't hold a job. His parents didn't know what to do with him. So I brought him out here. Put him to work. Figured work was work. Might help. Did it? Not at first. But then something shifted. Kid started spending time with the horses, just sitting in the pasture, not even touching them. Started sleeping better. Started talking again. Didn't fix everything, but it gave him something to hold on to. Vernon stood, joints creaking. His name's Hugh Brennan. Still lives nearby. Works construction when he can. Still struggles some days. But he's here, and that counts for something. He moved toward the door, then paused. Point is, sometimes helping something else helps you, even when it doesn't make sense to other people. Maybe especially then. After Vernon left, Wade sat with that for a while. Then he went back out to the horses. Gunner nickered his greeting. Ash watched from the corner of her stall. Ember paced, still unable to settle. Wade found himself talking to them the way his father used to talk to Dusty. Low and steady, not expecting answers, just filling the quiet with something other than worry. We're all a little broken here, he said. But maybe that's okay. Maybe broken things can help other broken things. That weekend, Presley asked if Wade would teach her to ride. Not on Ember. Even Presley understood the chestnut mare wasn't ready. But Gunner, maybe? Wade's first instinct was to say no. Too dangerous. Too soon. But then he saw the hope in his daughter's eyes, and remembered being that age, wanting nothing more than to connect with something larger than himself. Not riding yet, he said, but I can teach you how to groom him properly, how to read what he's telling you. The trust comes before anything else. Presley's face lit up. For the next hour, Wade showed her the same things his father had shown him. How to approach from the side so the horse could see you. How to move slowly and speak softly. How to listen with more than your ears. Gunner stood patient and gentle, seeming to understand he was teaching a young girl the same way he'd once taught a young boy. Corey watched from the barn door, trying to look uninterested. But when Wade glanced over, his son was paying attention. That night, Wade found a piece of scrap wood and his father's old wood-burning tool. He'd been decent at woodwork once, before time got away from him. He sketched out simple letters, then carefully burned them into the wood. Larkin Ranch, a place for healing. It was presumptuous, maybe. He didn't know if this place could heal anything, but the sign felt like a commitment, like saying out loud what he barely dared to hope. He hung it on the barn the next morning. It looked rough and homemade, but it was honest. Vernon drove by later that day, saw the sign, and gave a single nod of approval. 2 days after that, Wade received a call, a voice he didn't recognize. "Mr. Larkin, my name is Hugh Brennan. Vernon's my uncle. He said you might let me come by sometime, just to sit with the horses, if that's okay." Wade looked out the window at the 3 horses in the pasture, Gunner grazing peacefully, Ash standing at a careful distance from the others, Ember alone by the fence, head high, still watching for danger that might never come. "Yeah," Wade said. "That would be okay." He didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. Hugh Brennan arrived on a Thursday afternoon in a truck that had seen better years. He was 28, but looked older, with the kind of careful movements that suggested pain lived just beneath the surface. His eyes swept the property constantly, never settling, always assessing. Wade met him by the barn. They shook hands. Hugh's grip was firm but brief. "Vernon said you've got horses," Hugh said. No small talk, no explanation of why he was here. 3 of them, rescued from auction. They're still getting used to the place. "Can I see them?" Wade led him to the pasture where Gunner and Ash grazed. Ember stood, apart, as always. Hugh stopped at the fence and went very still. For 5 minutes, he just watched. Wade had learned not to fill silence with chatter, so he waited. "The chestnut's scared," Hugh said finally. "Yeah. She came from a bad situation." They all did, looks like. Hugh climbed carefully over the fence and sat down in the grass about 20 feet from the horses. He didn't try to approach, just sat. Wade watched from the fence. After a few minutes, Gunner lifted his head and looked at Hugh. Some unspoken communication passed between them. The old bay took a few steps closer, then went back to grazing. Ash watched but didn't move. Hugh stayed for an hour that first day. Didn't touch the horses. Barely spoke. When he left, he said, "I'd like to come back, if that's all right." "Anytime," Wade told him. Vernon stopped by that evening. "Hugh came by?" He did. Sat in the pasture mostly. "That's good. That's real good." Vernon looked relieved in a way Wade hadn't expected. "Kid's been struggling hard. Doctors, therapy, medications. Nothing really helps. But animals, sometimes they reach places people can't." Over the next 2 weeks, Hugh came 3 times a week. Same routine. He'd sit in the pasture, sometimes for hours. Gradually, the horses began to accept his presence. Gunner would graze near him. Ash started approaching, curious but cautious. Wade noticed changes in Hugh, too. He talked more, smiled occasionally. The constant vigilance in his eyes softened when he was with the horses. One afternoon, Wade found Hugh standing at Ash's stall, running his hand along her scarred shoulder. "She's been whipped," Hugh said quietly. "A lot." "Yeah. Before I got her. People do terrible things." Hugh's voice carried weight that suggested personal knowledge. "But she's still here. Still standing. That takes strength most people don't understand." Wade thought about that after Hugh left. About surviving. About the difference between being alive and actually living. About how sometimes just standing was the bravest thing you could do. But the practical realities were catching up with him. The horses ate through feed faster than he'd calculated. The barn needed repairs he kept putting off. His truck threw a check engine light he couldn't afford to diagnose. His savings account dwindled toward empty. He picked up extra shifts at Birdie's diner, washing dishes and bussing tables. It helped, but barely. Some nights he sat at the kitchen table with bills spread out, trying to make numbers work through force of will. Birdie noticed. She had a way of noticing things. "You're running yourself ragged," she said one evening after the dinner rush. "I'm managing." That's what people say when they're not managing. She poured him coffee he hadn't asked for. "The horse is doing okay?" "Getting better. There's a veteran who comes by, Vernon's nephew. I think it's helping him." Birdie studied Wade with those sharp, kind eyes. "And is it helping you?" Wade didn't have an answer for that. Was it helping? He was more tired than he'd ever been, more broke, more uncertain about the future. But also, and this was the strange part, more present, more connected to something beyond his own failures. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I can't stop now." 2 weeks later, Corey got in trouble at school again, fighting in the cafeteria. When Wade got the call from the principal, his stomach dropped. Diane was furious. "This is what I'm talking about, Wade. The instability. He needs structure. He needs to see his father acting like an adult instead of—" She stopped herself, but the implication hung there. Wade drove to the school to pick Corey up. His son sat in the principal's office with his arms crossed and his jaw set, radiating anger. They drove in silence for 10 minutes before Wade spoke. "You want to tell me what happened?" "No. You're going to have to talk to someone eventually." "Why? So you can tell me I'm screwing up?" "I already know." Wade pulled the truck over to the side of the road, turned to face his son. "I'm not here to tell you you're screwing up. I'm here because you're my kid, and I love you, and I want to understand what's going on." Corey's wall cracked slightly. "Kid said you were crazy, said you bought horses you can't afford because you're having a breakdown. Said the whole town knows you're a loser." Wade felt the words land, not because they weren't things he'd thought himself, but because his son had to hear them. "And you hit him? He didn't get to talk about you like that." Something in Wade's chest tightened. "Corey, I know it was stupid. I know I'm suspended. I know Mum's going to be impossible. But I'm not going to let some kid trash talk my dad." They sat there on the side of the road, two broken people in a broken truck, trying to figure out how to be a family when everything felt impossible. "Come to the ranch," Wade said. "Not as punishment. Just come." At the ranch, Wade brought Corey to Gunner's stall. The old bay stood peacefully, eyes half closed in the afternoon light. "When I got him, he could barely walk. Arthritis, neglect. Probably should have been put down years ago by whoever owned him before." Wade opened the stall door. "But he wasn't done yet. He just needed someone to believe that." He showed Corey how to approach, how to offer his hand. Gunner sniffed Corey's palm, then allowed himself to be touched. "He's calm," Corey said, surprise in his voice. "He is now. Wasn't always. Took time." Wade handed his son a brush. "Sometimes things that look broken just need patience and someone who won't give up on them." Corey brushed Gunner in silence for a long time. Wade watched his son's shoulders gradually relax, the anger seeping out of him, stroke by stroke. When they finished, Corey said quietly, "I'm sorry I said you quit on everything. You weren't entirely wrong. Yeah, but I was wrong about this. This isn't quitting." Corey looked at the 3 horses. "This is the opposite." That weekend, Corey asked if he could help with the ranch work. Wade showed him how to muck stalls, mix feed, check water levels. They worked side by side, rebuilding something between them one small task at a time. Sunday evening, as Diane picked the kids up, she pulled Wade aside. Corey's teacher called, said he wrote an essay about the horses, about patience and second chances. She looked at Wade with something that might have been respect. Maybe you're not as lost as I thought. After they left, Wade sat on the porch, watching the sun set. Hugh's truck pulled up the drive. Vernon's nephew got out, waved, and headed straight for the pasture. He didn't need permission anymore. This was becoming his place, too. Wade thought about the wooden sign he'd hung on the barn. A place for healing. It had seemed presumptuous when he'd made it. But watching Hugh sit peacefully among the horses, seeing the change in his own son, feeling the change in himself, maybe it wasn't presumptuous at all. Maybe it was just true. The weather turned properly cold in late November. Wade winterized the barn as best he could, stuffing gaps with old blankets and reinforcing the stall doors against the wind. The horses grew thick winter coats. Gunners made him look almost healthy. Ashes hid most of her scars. Embers gave her a wild, beautiful appearance that matched her spirit. Hugh came 4 times a week now, sometimes more. He'd started helping with chores without being asked, mucking stalls, filling water troughs, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who needed purpose as much as Wade did. One afternoon, while they worked side by side, Hugh spoke about Iraq. Not the combat, he never talked about that, but the aftermath, the feeling of being back in the world, but not quite part of it. The nights when sleep felt like enemy territory, the way loud noises sent him into high alert he couldn't shake. The horses don't judge, Hugh said, forking hay into Ash's stall. They don't expect me to be okay. They're just there. Wade understood. The horses didn't expect anything from him either. Not success, not wisdom, just presence. Vernon told me you saved my life, Hugh continued, by letting me come here. I didn't do anything, just opened a gate. Sometimes that's enough. Wade had been researching equine therapy programs late into the night, reading about PATH International certification and structured programs. The science behind it fascinated him. How horses, as prey animals, read human emotion and body language with incredible accuracy. How working with them could help people process trauma, build confidence, develop coping skills. But certification required money he didn't have, formal training, liability insurance. The gap between what he was doing and what he'd need to do it properly seemed insurmountable. Still, the seed was planted. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Birdie stopped by one morning with fresh bread and more questions than Wade wanted to answer. Hugh Brennan looks better, she observed. Vernon says you've worked miracles. I haven't done anything except let him sit with horses. That's something. People are noticing. She set the bread on his kitchen counter. Had a woman in the diner yesterday. Constance Freely. Lost her husband 6 months ago. She's struggling. I might have mentioned your horses. Wade felt a flutter of panic. Birdie, I'm not running a therapy program. I don't know what I'm doing. You're helping Hugh. Maybe you could help her too. It's not that simple. There's liability, insurance, certification. I can't just... can't or scared to. The question hung there. Wade didn't have an answer. That evening his phone rang. A woman's voice. Older, careful. Mr. Larkin, my name is Constance Freely. Birdie Callahan gave me your number. I hope that's all right. It's fine. She said you have horses, that they've helped someone she knows. I wonder if I might visit sometime. I wouldn't be any trouble. I just... Her voice caught. I'm finding it hard to be around people right now. But Birdie thought maybe being around animals might be different. Wade thought about turning her down, about explaining he wasn't qualified, but he remembered sitting in the barn after buying the horses, feeling utterly alone. and how they'd somehow made that loneliness bearable. "Tomorrow afternoon," he heard himself say. "Around 2? Thank you. Thank you so much." Constance Freely arrived at exactly 2 in a sensible sedan. She was 60, grey-haired, dressed in clothes that suggested she'd once cared about appearance, but had recently stopped trying. Wade recognized that look. He'd seen it in his own mirror. He met her by the barn, introduced himself properly, and led her to the pasture. "That's Gunner, the bay, Ash, the grey, and Ember, the chestnut. They all came from difficult situations." Constance watched them in silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick. "My husband died in May. Heart attack. 1 minute we were planning our retirement. The next minute he was gone. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Everyone means well. But being around people right now feels impossible. They expect me to be okay, or they treat me like I'm fragile, or they avoid me because grief makes them uncomfortable." She looked at the horses. "But these animals don't expect anything, do they?" "No. They just are what they are." Constance climbed over the fence with surprising agility and sat in the grass. Wade stayed at the fence, giving her space. Ash was grazing nearby. After a few minutes, the grey mare lifted her head and looked at Constance. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. One wounded soul seeing another. Ash took 3 steps closer, then 3 more. Finally, she stood beside Constance, not quite touching, but present. Constance reached up slowly and rested her hand on Ash's shoulder. The mare didn't move away. Wade watched as Constance began to cry. Not the case polite tears people allow in public, but deep, wrenching sobs. Ash stood steady beside her, occasionally lowering her head to breathe softly against the woman's hair. After a long time, Constance quieted. She stayed sitting with Ash for another hour. When she finally stood and walked back to Wade, her eyes were red, but clearer. "Could I come back?" she asked. "Any time." Over the next 2 weeks, a routine developed. Hugh came in the mornings. Constance came in the afternoons. Wade found himself orchestrating without quite meaning to, making sure the horses were ready, the barn was clean, the space felt safe. He started taking notes. What worked? What didn't? How different horses responded to different people. Gunner's steady patience suited people who needed grounding. Ash's wariness created connection with others who'd been hurt. Even Ember's unpredictability had value. She demanded presence and attention in a way that pulled people out of their own heads. One evening, Vernon found Wade in the barn reading a book on equine-assisted therapy he'd borrowed from the county library. The pages were dog-eared, filled with notes in the margins. "You're getting serious about this," Vernon observed. "Maybe. I don't know. It feels like something, but I don't know what. Feels like purpose." Wade looked up. "I can't afford to make this official. The certification alone costs thousands. Then there's insurance, facility upgrades, training. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't." "But if you could?" Wade closed the book. "Then maybe this could be something real. Something that helps people beyond just Hugh and Constance. Veterans, grieving families, people who are struggling. There's a need for this, Vernon. I can feel it. Then figure out how to make it happen. With what money? I've got maybe 4 months of savings left. The truck needs work. The barn needs work. I'm already taking charity shifts at Birdie's just to afford horse feed." Vernon sat down on a hay bale, creaking at the joints. "My nephew tried to kill himself 2 years ago. Did I ever tell you that?" Wade's breath caught. "No. Couldn't see a reason to keep going. The VA tried to help, but nothing worked. Then he came here, started sitting with horses. Now he's got a reason to get up in the morning. Vernon's eyes were wet. You can't put a price on that, Wade. But if you're going to do this right, you need help, and you need to be willing to ask for it. I don't even know where to start. Start by telling people what you're trying to do. Let them decide if they want to be part of it. That night, Wade sat at his father's desk with a legal pad and started writing. Not a business plan. He didn't know enough for that. Just a description of what was happening here. The horses, the people, the healing he was witnessing. He wrote about Gunnar teaching patience, Ash teaching trust, Ember teaching presence. He wrote about Hugh finding peace, Constance finding grief a safe place to exist, Corey finding connection with his father again. He wrote until his hand cramped, trying to capture something that felt bigger than he could fully understand. The next day, he showed what he'd written to Birdie. She read it twice, then looked at him with tears in her eyes. Wade Larkin, you're going to do something remarkable here. You know that? I'm just trying not to fail. No, you're trying to build something. There's a difference. She folded the pages carefully. Mind if I share this? I know some people who might want to help. Wade felt vulnerable in a way he hadn't since the divorce. Letting people see what he was trying to do meant letting them see how desperately he wanted it to work. But Vernon was right. He couldn't do this alone. Yeah, he said. Share it. Within a week, people started calling, offering donations, volunteer hours. A local lawyer offered to help with non-profit paperwork. A contractor said he'd fix the barn roof at cost. Small gestures that added up to something larger than their individual parts. Wade made a new sign for the barn, more professional than the first. Larkin Ranch Equine Therapy Center, in memory of Raymond Larkin. Hanging it felt like stepping off a cliff, hoping something would catch him. He didn't know that cliff was about to fall out from under him entirely. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in early December. Official county seal. Wade's hands shook as he opened it. Notice of zoning violation. Operating commercial therapeutic services on agricultural land. Cease operations within 60 days or face legal action and fines. Wade read it 3 times, each word sinking deeper into his chest like stones. He was in violation of county zoning codes. His property was designated for agricultural use only. Running any kind of therapy program, even an informal one, required commercial zoning, special permits, liability insurance, certified staff, and facility upgrades to meet health and safety standards. Estimated compliance cost, $45,000 in fees, renovations, and certifications. The letter concluded with a stark choice. Shut down immediately or face escalating fines of $500 per day until compliance was achieved. Wade sat at the kitchen table as the morning light moved across the floor. $45,000 might as well have been $45 million. He had maybe $3,000 in savings. The truck needed a new transmission. He owed back taxes on the property. He was barely keeping the lights on. The dream he'd just started to believe in was being crushed before it could take its first real breath. He called the county office. A clerk explained in bureaucratic language that a formal complaint had been filed. Someone had reported his operation. County was required to investigate. The findings were clear. Who filed the complaint? Wade asked. That information is confidential, sir. But Wade already knew. There was only one person who'd benefit from Wade failing. He drove into town, found Harlan Frost at the feed store, and confronted him in the parking lot. You filed that complaint. Frost didn't deny it. He leaned against his truck, arms crossed, expression cold. Just business, Larkin. You're operating illegally. County needed to know. This isn't about the law. This is about you wanting my land. Your land borders my eastern pasture. Been wanting to expand for years. Your father wouldn't sell. Figured you might be more reasonable. But then you got these fool ideas about therapy horses. Frost shook his head. You can't afford to fight this. Shut down now. Sell to me. You'll walk away with enough to start fresh somewhere else. I'm not selling. Then you're a fool. In 60 days you'll lose everything anyway. Fines will pile up. County will put a lien on the property. You'll lose it for nothing instead of getting paid. Frost climbed into his truck. Think about your kids, Larkin. What's this stubbornness teaching them? That you'd rather lose everything than admit you're beaten? Wade watched him drive away, rage and despair warring in his chest. That evening, Hugh and Constance both arrived for their usual times. Wade had to tell them. The words stuck in his throat, but they deserved to know. County shut us down. Zoning violation. I've got 60 days to either pay $45,000 I don't have or close permanently. Hugh's face went pale. Constance pressed her hand to her mouth. There has to be something we can do, Constance said. I don't know what. I can't afford a lawyer. Can't afford the upgrades. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Wade felt like he was failing them the way he'd failed at everything else. What about fundraising? Hugh asked. People would donate. Not $45,000. Not in 60 days. They sat in heavy silence. Finally, Constance went to sit with Ash one last time. Hugh stood in the barn with Wade, both of them staring at nothing. This place saved my life, Hugh said quietly. You know that, right? I know. Then don't give up yet. But Wade didn't know how to fight, didn't know where to start. That night, unable to sleep, he went to the attic looking for his father's old tax records. Maybe there was something there that could help, some loophole, some precedent. What he found instead was a cardboard box filled with papers he'd never seen before, sketches, building plans, notes in his father's careful handwriting. His father had designed a therapy ranch, years ago, maybe 20 years back. Detailed drawings of modified stalls, a covered arena, accessible pathways, notes about working with veterans and troubled youth, research on equine therapy programs. Wade sat on the attic floor, reading through his father's abandoned dream, and felt something crack open in his chest. Raymond Larkin had wanted to do exactly what Wade was trying to do, had planned it, researched it, designed every detail. But at the bottom of the box, Wade found a letter. His father's handwriting, addressed to no one. Couldn't do it. Too proud to ask for help. Too scared of what people would think if I failed. Told myself the ranch was enough. But I see these young men coming back from war with haunted eyes, and I know I could help. Should help. But I'm letting fear win. Maybe someday someone braver than me will do what I couldn't. The date on the letter was 3 years before his father died. Wade sat in the dusty attic with his father's dreams in his hands and understood something profound. His father hadn't been the stern, emotionless man Wade had always believed. He'd been scared, human, dreaming of something bigger than himself, but unable to reach for it. The ranch Wade had always seen as a prison, the place his father had chosen over relationship with his son, had actually been a potential sanctuary his father couldn't bring himself to create. Wade had been given a second chance to fulfill his father's abandoned dream. But he was facing the same obstacles, the same fears, the same choice between safety and possibility. He could let it go. Sell to Frost, take the money and leave, stay safe, stay small, or he could fight for something impossible, risk total failure, risk proving every skeptic right. Wade carried the box downstairs and spread the papers on the kitchen table. He looked at his father's careful drawings, his hopeful notes, his confession of fear. "I'm not giving up, Dad," Wade said to the empty kitchen. "Not this time." He didn't know how he'd come up with $45,000. Didn't know how to fight county bureaucracy. Didn't know if this was courage or just another form of foolishness. But sitting there surrounded by his father's dreams, looking out the window at 3 horses who'd taught him about healing, Wade made his choice. He would fight. The next morning he called Vernon, then Birdie, then the local newspaper. He told them everything, the violation, the money needed, the timeline. He showed them his father's plans, explained the vision. "I need help," he said, the hardest words he'd ever spoken. "I can't do this alone." Vernon looked at the plans, then at Wade. "About time you asked. Let's get to work." Within hours, the phone started ringing. People wanting to help, wanting to be part of something. Wade had spent his whole life trying to be self-sufficient, and now he was learning that the bravest thing might be letting people in. 60 days to save everything. The clock started ticking, but for the first time in a long time, Wade wasn't facing it alone. Vernon called an emergency meeting at Birdie's diner that Wednesday evening. Word had spread fast. By 6 o'clock, 30 people packed into the small space. Wade stood at the front, feeling exposed and terrified. He explained the situation, the zoning violation, the 60-day deadline, the $45,000 needed for compliance, his father's abandoned plans, his own desperate hope that this could work. "I can't promise success," he said, "but I believe this matters. I've seen what these horses can do. Hugh's healing, Constance finding peace, my own son reconnecting with me. If we can make this official, we could help so many more people." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Vernon stood. "I'm in for $1,000, and whatever labor you need." Birdie raised her hand. "I'll donate $500 and organize fundraising events here at the diner." One by one, people committed. Money, time, skills. A contractor offered to handle barn renovations at cost. An accountant volunteered to help with non-profit paperwork. A lawyer said she'd work pro bono on zoning appeals. By the end of the night, they'd raised $8,000 in pledges and assembled a volunteer crew. It was nowhere near enough, but it was a start. Mason jars appeared on counters around town, at the diner, the hardware store, the post office, each one labeled Larkin Ranch Healing Fund with a brief explanation. Dollars and coins accumulated slowly. 5 here, 20 there. People giving what they could. Wade worked doubles at the diner while maintaining the ranch. Up at 4 to feed horses, work until 7, rush to the diner for the breakfast shift. Back to the ranch by 3 to meet Hugh and Constance. Evening chores until dark, then paperwork and planning until midnight. His body screamed for rest. His mind ran on coffee and determination. Corey asked if he could help on weekends, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Father and son worked side by side, rebuilding fence sections, painting the barn, preparing for inspections that might never come. "You really think this will work?" Corey asked one Saturday afternoon. "I don't know, but I think it's worth trying. Even if you lose everything?" Wade paused, hammer in hand. "Especially then. Some things matter more than safe." Presley organized a fundraiser at her school. Bake sale, car wash, donation drive. She stood in front of her classmates and explained about the horses, about healing, about her dad trying to do something good. They raised $600. When she handed Wade the envelope full of small bills and checks, he had to turn away so she wouldn't see him cry. The local newspaper ran a feature story. Single Father's Fight to Save Healing Ranch. It was honest and detailed, including Wade's failures alongside his hopes. The reporter captured something essential. This wasn't about one man's ego, but about community need. The story went regional. Then a larger newspaper picked it up. Then social media caught it. Suddenly, people from across the state were reading about 3 rescue horses and a struggling dad trying to create something meaningful. Donations started arriving in the mail. $10 from a veteran in Billings, $25 from a widow in Great Falls, $50 from a family who'd lost a son to suicide, strangers investing in a dream they'd never see firsthand. The mason jar at Birdie's, diner filled and was emptied into the ranch account 3 times. The total climbed. 12,000, 16,000, 20,000. But time was running faster than money. 3 weeks before the deadline, Wade met with the pro bono lawyer, Judith Chen. No, wait, he needed to avoid that name. The lawyer's name was Judith Kemp. She reviewed the zoning requirements. The good news is we can apply for a variance and non-profit status simultaneously. The bad news is the process usually takes 4 to 6 months, and you have 3 weeks. Can we expedite? I'll try. But the zoning board only meets once a month. Their next meeting is in 8 days. If they don't approve your variance, you'll have to shut down regardless of the money. Wade felt the weight of it. Even if they raised every dollar, bureaucracy could still kill this. What are our chances? Judith was quiet for a moment. Honestly? Maybe 30%. Harlan Frost has friends on the board. He's been a major taxpayer for years. You're new to this. They'll question your qualifications, your business plan, your long-term viability. So I need to convince them. You need to show them why this matters more than procedure. That evening, Hugh found Wade in the barn, staring at his father's old plans. You okay? Scared, Wade admitted. What if I can't pull this off? What if I let everyone down? Hugh sat on a hay bale. Before I came here, I'd wake up every morning wishing I hadn't. Couldn't see a future, couldn't imagine feeling okay again. Then Vernon brought me to meet some horses, and you didn't ask questions or try to fix me. You just let me be here. I didn't do anything. You did everything. You showed up. You kept showing up. That's what saved me. Hugh looked at Wade steadily. People need this place. Not just me. Not just Constance. All the people you haven't met yet who are struggling the way we were. You can't give up on them. I'm not giving up. I'm just terrified. Yeah, me too. Every day. But you taught me that being scared and showing up anyway is what courage looks like. After Hugh left, Wade sat with those words, being scared and showing up anyway. His phone buzzed, a text from Diane. Heard about the fundraising. The kids are proud of you. So am I. It was the first kind thing she'd said to him in 2 years. 2 weeks before the deadline, a local TV station called. They wanted to interview Wade, show the horses, talk to people who'd been helped. Wade's instinct was to refuse. He hated being the center of attention, hated the vulnerability of asking for help so publicly. But this wasn't about him anymore. The interview aired on the evening news. Wade spoke simply about second chances, about healing, about community. They filmed Hugh working peacefully with Ash, Constance talking about grief, finding a safe place, Corey explaining how the horses had helped him understand his father. The segment ended with Wade standing by the paddock, 3 horses behind him, saying, "Some things are worth fighting for even when the odds are impossible. These horses taught me that. They survived when they shouldn't have. They healed when nobody expected it. If they can do that, maybe we can too." The response was immediate. The phone rang constantly. Donations poured in. $28,000, 32,000, 36,000. 5 days before the deadline, they hit $40,000. Almost enough. Not quite. But the zoning board meeting was tomorrow. Win or lose, it would be decided there. Wade spent that evening with the horses. Gunnar rested his big head against Wade's chest. Ash allowed herself to be brushed without flinching. Even Ember came close, curious and almost calm. "We tried," Wade told them. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we tried." He went to bed that night, not knowing if he'd saved anything or lost everything. The future balanced on a knife edge, and morning would tip it one way or the other. The county courthouse was built in 1952, solid brick and high ceilings, the kind of building designed to make you feel small. Wade arrived at 8:30 for the 9 o'clock hearing, his hands sweating despite the December cold. The hallway outside the hearing room filled quickly. Vernon arrived first, wearing his good jacket. Birdie came with 3 other diner regulars. Hugh walked in with his parents, people Wade had never met, but who nodded at him with grateful eyes. Constance sat on a bench near the door, her hands folded in her lap, calm in a way she hadn't been 3 months ago. Corey and Presley came with Diane. His ex-wife caught Wade's eye and gave him a small nod. The kids sat on either side of him, Presley holding his hand, Corey sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. By 5 minutes to 9, 60 people packed the hallway. Friends, neighbors, people Wade barely knew. All there to support something that mattered to them. The doors opened. The hearing room had seating for about 40. People stood along the walls. The county fire marshal looked concerned about capacity, but said nothing. The zoning board sat at a raised table at the front. 5 members. Wade recognized 3. Phyllis Crane, 68, a retired teacher known for following rules to the letter. Jack Morrison, a local business owner who'd always been fair, and Terence Hughes, who'd been friends with Harlan Frost for 20 years. Frost himself sat in the front row on the opposite side, his lawyer beside him. He looked confident. He had reason to be. The board chairman, Morrison, called the meeting to order. He reviewed the case quickly. Wade Larkin operating an unlicensed therapeutic facility on agricultural land. Violation of county code. Application for variance and non-profit status submitted 3 weeks ago. Mr. Larkin, you'll have 15 minutes to present your case. Then we'll hear from any opposition. Then the board will deliberate. 15 minutes to save everything. Wade stood. He'd prepared notes, but left them in his pocket. This needed to come from the heart. My name is Wade Larkin. 6 months ago, I was divorced, broke, and living in my dead father's house with no idea what I was doing with my life. I went to an auction and bought 3 horses nobody wanted. People thought I was crazy. I thought I was crazy. A few quiet laughs from the audience. But something happened with those horses. They started healing, and people started showing up. A veteran with PTSD who couldn't sleep, a widow drowning in grief, my own son, angry at the world and at me. And those horses, old, scared, broken horses, they helped in ways I still don't fully understand. Wade looked at the board members. Phyllis Crane's expression was unreadable. Morrison listened carefully. Hughes looked skeptical. I know I violated the zoning code. I didn't mean to, but that doesn't matter. I did. And I'm asking for a variance because what's happening on my property matters. Not just to me. To people who have nowhere else to turn. He explained the fundraising. The $40,000 raised in 4 weeks. The volunteer support. The plans for proper certification and insurance. His father's abandoned dream that Wade was trying to fulfill. This isn't about profit. It's not even really about horses. It's about giving people a place to heal when everything else has failed. Veterans who can't integrate back into civilian life. families dealing with loss, kids who need to connect with something beyond screens and anger. Wade's 15 minutes were almost up. I'm asking you to give us a chance, grant the variance, give us 6 months to get fully certified and compliant. If we fail, shut us down, but let us try. He sat down, his heart hammered against his ribs. Morrison thanked him, then asked if anyone wished to speak in support. Hugh stood first. His hands shook, but his voice was steady. My name is Hugh Brennan. I'm an Iraq war veteran. 3 years ago, I tried to kill myself. The room went silent. The VA couldn't help. Therapy didn't work. Medication didn't work. I was done. Then my uncle brought me to Wade's ranch and asked me to sit with a horse. Hugh's voice cracked. That horse was covered in scars from being beaten, but she was still standing, still trying, and somehow that reached me when nothing else could. I've been sober 4 months, sleeping through the night, working again. I'm alive because of what Wade created. Constance spoke next, about losing her husband, about the isolation of grief, about finding Ash and learning that broken things could hold each other up. One by one, people testified, parents whose kids had found direction, veterans finding peace, neighbors witnessing transformation. Corey stood up unexpectedly. Wade's breath caught. I'm Wade's son. For a long time, I thought my dad was a failure, that he'd given up on everything. But watching him fight for these horses taught me what courage actually looks like. It's not about never falling down. It's about getting back up and trying again even when everybody says you can't. Diane wiped her eyes. Wade felt his throat tighten. After 12 people had spoken, Morrison called for opposition. Harlan Frost's lawyer stood. He was smooth and prepared. The board must consider precedent. Mr. Larkin operated illegally for months. If you grant this variance, you're saying rules don't matter. Every hobby farm in the county could claim therapeutic purposes and ignore zoning laws. He presented his case methodically. Property values, legal precedent, the slippery slope of exceptions. It was effective because it was logical. Frost himself spoke briefly. I've got nothing against Wade personally, but this is about proper procedure. We can't let emotion override law. The board chairman thanked everyone and announced the board would deliberate. The audience was asked to remain seated. The 5 board members huddled together, speaking in low voices Wade couldn't hear. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. Presley squeezed Wade's hand tighter. Corey sat rigid beside him. Finally, the board members returned to their seats. Phyllis Crane would speak for them. She was a stern woman, grey hair pulled back, reading glasses on a chain. She looked at Wade for a long moment. This board has reviewed the zoning violation filed against Wade Larkin. We've heard testimony from Mr. Larkin and community members. We've reviewed the opposition's concerns. Wade couldn't breathe. The law is clear. Mr. Larkin violated county code by operating a therapeutic facility on agricultural land without proper permits, certification, or licensing. The room deflated. Wade felt Presley's grip go tight. However, the word hung in the air like a lifeline. Phyllis Crane removed her reading glasses, set them on the table, and looked directly at Wade. However, this board also recognizes that laws exist to serve communities, not to hinder genuine efforts to help people in need. We've witnessed extraordinary testimony today about real healing, real transformation, real lives being saved. Wade's heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. Mr. Larkin has demonstrated commitment through significant fundraising and community support. He's shown willingness to comply with all legal requirements, and he's presented a viable path forward. Phyllis glanced at her fellow board members, then continued. Therefore, this board grants a conditional 6-month probationary variance. During this period, Mr. Larkin must complete the following: obtain non-profit status, secure appropriate liability insurance, complete PATH International Level 1 certification or equivalent, and implement all required facility safety upgrades. The room erupted. People cheering, crying, embracing. Wade sat frozen, unable to process what he'd just heard. Furthermore, Phyllis raised her voice over the noise, the board recognizes the financial burden these requirements impose. We're authorizing county assistance, programs to reduce permit fees by 60%. Additionally, we're waiving inspection costs for facilities serving veterans and low-income populations. Wade's legs felt weak. The cost would drop from $45,000 to maybe $30,000. They'd raised $40,000. It was possible. It was actually possible. If Mr. Larkin successfully meets all requirements within 6 months, full zoning approval will be granted. If he fails to meet any requirement, the variance is revoked, and operations must cease immediately. This is a one-time exception based on extraordinary circumstances and community need. Morrison looked at Wade. Mr. Larkin, do you accept these terms? Wade stood, his voice barely working. Yes. Yes, I accept. Thank you. Good luck, son. Don't let us down. The hearing adjourned. The room exploded into celebration. Vernon grabbed Wade in a bear hug. Bertie was crying. Hugh stood off to the side, tears streaming down his face, looking more at peace than Wade had ever seen him. Corey and Presley crashed into Wade from both sides. He wrapped his arms around them, and for a moment, everything that had been broken between them felt whole. Diane approached carefully. You did it. We did it. All of us. She smiled, a real smile. The kids can stay the weekend if you want. Help you celebrate. I'd like that. Outside the courthouse, people gathered on the steps, despite the cold. Someone had brought coffee. Strangers congratulated Wade. A few people handed him checks right there, bringing the total past $42,000. Harlan Frost emerged from the building, saw the celebration, and walked to his truck without a word. Wade caught his eye for just a moment. Frost's expression was unreadable. Anger, maybe, or resignation, or just the cold calculation of a man who'd lost this round but wasn't done fighting. Wade let him go. This wasn't about defeating Frost. It was about building something that mattered. That evening, the core group gathered at the ranch. Vernon, Birdie, Hugh, Constance, Judith the lawyer, the contractor who'd volunteered his services, Wade's kids. Even Diane stayed for a while. They sat in the barn with the 3 horses, sharing pizza and cheap beer, planning the next 6 months. The work ahead was daunting. Certifications to complete, paperwork to file, facilities to upgrade, staff to train. But sitting there surrounded by people who believed in this dream, Wade felt something he hadn't felt since before the divorce. Hope. Real, solid, tangible hope. Vernon raised his beer to Raymond Larkin, who dreamed this first, and to his son, who had the guts to make it real. They drank to that. Wade felt his father's presence in the barn, in the worn leather gloves hanging by the door, in the careful plans that had guided them here. His father had been too afraid to try, too proud to ask for help, but he'd left behind everything Wade needed to succeed where he'd failed. Dad, we did it, Wade whispered, when the others weren't, listening. We're doing it. Later, after everyone left, Wade walked out to the pasture. The 3 horses stood together in the moonlight. Gunner solid and calm. Ash no longer flinching at sounds. Even Ember seemed settled, her wild energy transforming into strength. 6 months ago, these horses had been destined for slaughter. Unwanted, discarded, broken beyond repair in most people's eyes. Now they were teachers, healers, the foundation of something that would help countless others. Wade climbed the fence and sat on the top rail. The horses approached slowly. Gunnar came first, resting his big head against Wade's knee. Ash followed, allowing Wade to scratch behind her ears. And Ember, skittish, fierce Ember, stood close enough that Wade could feel her warmth in the cold night air. "Thank you," he told them, "for saving me when I didn't know I needed saving." Gunnar huffed softly, his breath warm in the December air. Behind Wade, the barn stood solid and real, the new sign illuminated by the porch light, Larkin Ranch Equine Therapy Center, in memory of Raymond Larkin. It wasn't finished yet. 6 months of hard work lay ahead, certifications to earn, standards to meet, 1,000 details to manage. But the foundation was laid. The community was committed. The dream was alive. Corey appeared beside Wade, climbing up to sit on the fence rail. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the horses. "I'm proud of you, Dad," Corey said quietly. Wade's throat tightened. "I'm proud of you too, son, for standing up for me, for believing in this. It's not just believing in this, it's believing in you." They sat together until the cold drove them inside. Through the kitchen window, Wade could see Presley at the table, drawing pictures of the horses. Diane sat with her, helping. A small moment of family that felt like grace. Wade made hot chocolate the way his father used to make it. Real chocolate melted in milk, not the instant kind. He served it in chipped mugs that had been in the kitchen for 40 years. "To new beginnings," Diane said, raising her mug. They drank to that, to second chances, to healing, to the long road ahead. Outside, the horses moved peacefully through the pasture. Inside, a family found its way toward something that looked like forgiveness. And somewhere in the space between, a dream took root that would grow into something none of them could fully imagine yet. The fight had been won, but the real work was just beginning. And Wade Larkin, once broken and directionless, now had a purpose that would carry him forward for years to come. Everything was about to change, but this time he was ready. Spring came to Montana with the kind of gentleness that made you forget winter ever existed. 6 months had passed since the courthouse hearing, and Wade stood in the barn hanging a brass plaque on the wall beside his father's old work gloves. Larkin Ranch Equine Therapy Center, founded in memory of Raymond Larkin, established 2024. The plaque gleamed in the morning light, official and permanent. They'd done it. Every requirement met, every certification earned, every inspection passed. The ranch looked different now. The barn roof was solid. Fresh paint covered buildings that had been peeling for years. The pastures were fenced properly. A covered arena stood where an old equipment shed had been. Accessible pathways wound through the property, making it possible for people with mobility issues to reach the horses safely. But the biggest changes weren't visible. They lived in the people who came here. Wade now ran structured therapy sessions 3 days a week. He'd completed his PATH International certification in March, studying late into nights, learning the science behind what he'd been doing instinctively. 2 part-time staff members helped. Hugh was one of them, trained and certified, transformed from client to colleague. The other was a woman named Kendra Price, a former occupational therapist who'd lost her job when the clinic closed and found new purpose here. Together they served veterans, trauma survivors, at-risk youth, and families navigating grief. Gunnar, Ash, and Ember were now certified therapy horses. Gunnar worked primarily with people needing grounding and stability. Ash connected with those who'd experienced abuse or betrayal. Ember, still the most challenging, worked with clients who needed to learn presence and emotional regulation. They'd added 2 more horses in April, a gentle paint mare named Willow and an older gelding called Porter. The herd was growing along with the program. This morning, Wade was preparing for a tour. A group of 6 veterans from across the state were coming for an orientation session. He checked the schedule Kendra had left on the clipboard. 2 individual sessions this afternoon. A family session tomorrow. The calendar was full in a way that felt purposeful rather than overwhelming. Vernon arrived around 9, as he did most mornings now. He'd joined the board of directors, helping manage the non-profit's finances and community relationships. His nephew Hugh had been sober for 10 months, was engaged to be married, and talked about someday running his own equine therapy program in another county. "Big day," Vernon observed, watching Wade make final preparations. "Every day's big lately." "Good problem to have." Birdie stopped by with lunch, sandwiches for the staff and visitors. She'd become the unofficial hospitality coordinator, making sure everyone who came to the ranch felt welcomed and fed. Her diner had become an unofficial satellite office where people could donate, volunteer, or just hear stories about the healing happening on the Larkin property. The veterans arrived at 10. Wade met them in the barn, introduced himself and the horses, and explained the philosophy simply. "We don't fix anyone here. We just provide space for you to find what you need. The horses don't judge. They don't expect you to be anything other than what you are. Sometimes that's enough to help you start healing." He watched 6 men, ranging from 25 to 60, each carrying their own invisible wounds. By the end of the 2-hour session, he saw shoulders relax, saw guarded expressions soften, saw one man cry while brushing ash, the first tears he'd allowed himself in 3 years. It was why Wade did this work, these small transformations, these moments of breakthrough. Corey showed up after school. He came most weekdays now, helping with evening chores and spending time with the horses. His grades had improved. The anger that had consumed him was channeling into purpose. He talked about becoming a veterinarian, about working with animals full-time. Presley had her own riding lessons on Gunner twice a week. She was becoming a skilled young horsewoman, gentle and intuitive. She'd started a youth program at school, teaching other kids about the ranch and organizing fundraisers to support their scholarship fund for families who couldn't afford therapy sessions. Diane visited occasionally, always a bit formal, but genuinely supportive. She'd admitted last month that seeing Wade succeed at this had changed her perception of him. They weren't getting back together. Too much water under that bridge. But they'd found a respectful, co-parenting relationship that worked. That evening, after the last visitors left, Wade walked the property alone. He passed the covered arena where tomorrow's sessions would happen. The barn where 3 horses had started this entire journey. The house where his father had lived and died, now feeling less like a haunted space and more like home. He stopped at the pasture fence. All 5 horses grazed peacefully in the golden hour light. Gunner lifted his head and whinnied softly, acknowledging Wade's presence without needing him to come closer. Wade thought about the day 6 months ago when he'd stood at an auction, broke and hopeless, and made an impulsive decision that had seemed like the final mistake in a long series of failures. He'd thought he was saving 3 horses. He hadn't understood that they were saving him. The work ahead was endless. More certifications to pursue, more horses to train, more people to help, financial sustainability to maintain. But for the first time in years, Wade looked at the future and saw possibility instead of dread. His phone buzzed. A text from Hugh. New referral from the VA. Combat medic. Severe PTSD. Can we fit her in next week? Wade typed back. We'll make room. Because that's what this place was now. A place that made room. For broken horses and broken people, for second chances and slow healing, for grief and hope existing side by side. Wade's father had dreamed this but couldn't bring himself to try, too scared of failure, too proud to ask for help. He'd died with his dream unrealized, tucked away in a box in the attic. Wade had taken that abandoned dream and made it real. Not alone. He'd learned that lesson hard, but with the help of a community that believed in healing as much as he did. The sun dropped below the mountains. The horses moved toward the barn for evening feed. Wade followed them, his father's leather gloves in his back pocket, carried everywhere now as a reminder. Some legacies are inherited, others are earned. The best ones are both. Wade Larkin had finally come home. Not to the place he'd left, but to the man he'd always been meant to become. And 3 unwanted horses had shown him the way.